And welcome back to another special edition of the Michael Decon program. First time listeners out there, thank you so much for finding us. We do hope you stick around. Do keep in mind, no matter what it is you do choose to believe, we admire you for your curiosity. Joining us this evening, live and direct, is the return of Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I believe he is patiently waiting. Let's bring him in right now. Doctor, what's going on?
Hi, how you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm glad you are here. And my goodness, Doctor, we have lots to discuss here tonight.
Yes, we do.
Could you hear the phone ringing back there?
No, I can't hear the phone.
I heard a phone. I believe it might have been mine. But regardless, I'm glad you're here. And again, the first time you were here was, I think it might have been 6 months ago, Paul.
Yeah, no, I mean, your channel was one of the first, I would probably say the first 4 or 5 that I was on talking about the whole crisis.
Yeah, we've been at it.
The whole COVID-19 crisis. Back then, it was, I don't even think they had a name, COVID-19, yet. I think we just called it the Wuhan crisis.
We were just calling it the Wuhan flu.
Yeah.
Pretty wild. And time has flown by.
Yes, it has.
I can't believe it. Sure. And Doctor, you've been really busy with your own YouTube channel, of course, and the War Room that you like to do, that little segment there.
Yeah. You know, I'm trying to document on my channel the best I can by interviewing people and then, critiquing certain news announcements and showing that there's a progression through this. It's not just the epidemiological progression and the disease, but there's also and we talked about it on your show, the erosion of the civil liberties and this geopolitical aspect to this with the CCP and the United States. There's just so many different facets to this. It's not just a virus, and it's not just the erosion of our economy, but there's a big geopolitical play happening. If you just listen to the news lately, the last news cycle, Dr. Li Ming Yan, she's being basically propped up on Bannon's show, Stephen Bannon's show. She was on there for about a month, and then she goes on Tucker Carlson and she starts talking about the CCP virus and how it was, made in a lab. But what's interesting is that she doesn't bring anything, to the table about how it was first developed in the United States with the Batwoman and the University of North Carolina in conjunction with Fort Detrick under funding from Fauci during the Obama administration. So you can almost see on how the news cycle is spinning it as it's only a China virus. It's only the CCP virus. Even Epoch News, stated that. Makes you wonder, where some of their allegiance. Is it the allegiance to truth and what really happened? Or is it more spinning the story, very similar to what happened right after 9/11? 9/11, they spun the story that it was all the Middle East. Oh no, there was a standout by Cheney. They allowed the planes to hit the towers that eventually led to the excursion into the Middle East and the erosion of our civil liberties through the Patriot Act.
Right.
I see a very similar play going on. It's orchestrated. It's almost like they have a playbook they go by. Crisis. If you're going to do a crisis, these are the rules. This is the playbook that you use. The 9/11 crisis was the same playbook. The Wuhan crisis is the same playbook. But in the current news cycle, Dr. Yan basically was, she did her practice run on Bannon's show and Stephen Bannon's show, which is also called the War Room Pandemic.
Right.
But now she was on Tucker Carlson this week, and she released a paper saying that she can prove that it was made in the lab. Well, this is what we've been seeing on your show
for 6 months.
Way early on.
And I'm glad you. Let me just stop you there really quickly and just say, It was 6 months ago again when you first appeared on the program. My life changed completely. I don't know about you, Paul, but maybe 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, I actually had quit my job.
Oh wow!
Right.
Yeah.
Because I felt something was coming, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I really did. Yeah. And if I would have stayed there, I'm pretty sure I would have maybe gotten sick. I'm not sure, but it's really something to look back at in this short window of time. I recall when I first told you that these vaccinations will definitely be mandated, and this vaccination will come with a certain ID tag, and that would be used for employment and travel purposes. People were laughing at me and thought I was fucking crazy. And well, they don't think that anymore.
Right. Well,
that's for sure.
You were warning people what your gut feeling was. You were using logic and
probability,
just that visceral,
right?
And then that visceral feeling that it's like, well, wait a minute. Once they start forcing a vaccine program and start doing decaching, and they use all this surveillance technology from with with 5G. I call it E7 because of just we don't want the censorship on the channel, but E7 technology, we're moving into that whole Brave New World tagging. It's a combination of Brave New World in 1984. But definitely they're going to do a forced vaccine program, and they're going to tag you and say you can't work unless you follow this. And once they do T-cashing, you are locked in because you can't hide your money. You can't get your money out of the banking system.
You really can't. And go ahead.
You can almost see it happening. People that are getting out of shelter in place and going back to work, the HR departments are saying, oh, you got to be doing this, you got to be wearing the mask, you got to be doing self-check, you got to be, typing into this app and, say, answer these questions. Did you have a fever? Are you coughing? Do you feel dizzy? Blah, blah, blah. So now you got the corporate lawyers involved and the insurance companies. And my worry is that because of the litigious society we live in, that it's going to force people to take vaccines,
right,
just so they can go back to work.
That's crazy, but that's the reality. That's the reality that we are facing, no doubt. And when I say that, I don't mean that in a braggadocious demeanor. That we were talking about these things 6 months ago. Paul, I remember telling you my theory was that the virus was being worked on here in America and in Canada and of course in China, and this thing traveled around.
Oh, there is.
It seems like that's true. that happened.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, there is a paper trail on which labs did what part of the research.
So my point is, why doesn't the mainstream media tell us these things though? That's my whole argument.
They're captured. I did a show on this. There's a few shows on my channel. They're captured. They're owned by globalists. All right, and they have to push a certain agenda. Okay. Do you ever see on Fox or on CNN talking about Monsanto's?
Never.
And the glyphosate?
Not at all.
Issues? Yeah, exactly. Why? Because they need the ad revenue.
Yeah, they need that money.
Did they talk about Boeing and the crappy design of their new plane? No, because they need Boeing to advertise on their show. So they're never going to talk negative about a company or about the establishment, because they're either get their licensing from the establishment or they're getting their ad revenue, from the companies that they really should be covering. So we have the fourth branch of government, which in a strange way is the press, but the fourth branch of government is not. It's captured from the globalists, So we don't have a free press. So that's why, that's why our channels are so important, because we're not beholden to this capturing mechanism that the mainstream is in. So we can say things until they censor us or pull our channels down. I mean, that's what happened to Stephen Molyneux and Mike Adams. But we're at a point where the real news is our interpretation of events, the best that we can do, and having these kinds of long conversations and repeated conversations to try to articulate what is really going on in the world, because you're not going to hear it from the mainstream media. So we are the fourth branch of government. The Michael Decon Show, you're the fourth branch of government. You don't even realize.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah,
but it's true.
We are the free press. It's not CNN or Fox News.
Yeah, we're not corporate owned.
Right.
No one's telling us what to say or what to do, and that's for sure.
Right. I mean, we did. There is ample evidence that this was a bioengineered virus that was used for scientific purposes at the very beginning. It bifurcated into a weapons program. There are many lines, not just one, many lines, hundreds of lines of this. Some of them have high, virulence. Some of it is not so virulent. Some of them have different affinities to different receptors. But the one that we have floating around has a very high affinity to the ACE2 receptor. And there is a paper trail that goes all the way back to research done in a lab in 2007 where they made a chimera virus where they took the bat SARS and the SARS virus, put them together in a plasmid, infected 293 cell line, and infected those cells with a pseudo HIV virus.
Yeah, and that's what the mainstream doesn't mention. That's what worries me the most. They don't tell them the truth.
Through that recombination in those cell lines, it led them to be able to cell select for a high affinity ACE2 receptor recombination. And then from there, they were backward dated to find out what the sequence was that was recombined naturally in the cell line in the lab to be able to further develop the weapons program. And so, Dr. Shi, who's the Batwoman, she in 2005 started collecting samples from bats in China to understand why they were the host for SARS. Scientific reason, right? To understand the biology of it, to be able to understand the SARS virus. Okay, I get that. In 2008, she writes her Chimera paper that I just referenced. Then she goes dark, and then all of a sudden, she's working with University of North Carolina in Fort Detrick with Dr. Barrick, and they are developing a weapons program with DoD and Department of Homeland Security. Obama shuts down the program because there was too much. It was too much gain of function. So at least on the surface, the program was shut down, and then it was outsourced, parts of it to Canada and parts of it to Wuhan facility. So there's a paper trail on this, and not only the paper trail is in the scientific literature, but the affidavit right from Mikovits and the actual NIH database shows the funding of over $7 million that went to Wuhan facility for gain of function of the coronavirus.
Right, and there was a research paper I was looking for, a PDF that talked about the receptor usage between these sort of things that were I'm forgetting the name exactly what it was, but this paper, this PDF file is no longer online. They knocked it off. They knocked it off completely.
Oh, this is the Indian. You're talking about the Indian homology
that paper.
I have it.
You have it. Well, it's not on. It's not online anymore. I was looking for it.
No. Yeah, that's the thing. Is that when we started noticing that they were censoring the databases that were free to the public, then we had a bunch of researchers taking those PDFs and starting to mirror them on the internet.
Yeah, so that was odd because I was just looking for it right now just to bring it up to you that this research it definitely goes back to 2007, and I'm getting tongue-tied because holy shit, they took it down.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why it's so important to download the PDFs, put them in your Google Drives and on your locals, and share them. Because if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the Indian paper that was released this year about the HIV homology, I wouldn't have known to look for the sequence that showed the 3 inserts for the glycoprotein 120 and the insert for GAG that allows for the furin cleavage that is the gain of function for human ACE2 receptor. If it wasn't for that insertion, we wouldn't have that species jump. Now, what's interesting is there's a lot more. Since we've talked, other researchers have reached out to me and said, "Hey, Paul, take a look at the genome. I've found some other HIV homology. There is a huge chunk of glycoprotein 41 in this virus. Huge chunk. All right, it's like 28 amino acids. I believe it's chain A of the glycoprotein 41. There's chain A, B, and C.
Oh, Paul, that's just Mother Nature. Don't worry.
No. There's no way that you could have Mother Nature combine. That's
Yes,
the thing. There's no way that Mother Nature would have combined
exactly.
the bat SARS-like virus, the SARS virus, the HIV homology, huge chunks of the HIV homology for glycoprotein 41 and glycoprotein 120 and GAG, and it be right across the river at a wet lab, at a wet market, that it just so happened to spread it in the Wuhan province. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it makes no
Total
sense.
that's total BS. And it so happens that it just that Dr. Shi works at the Wuhan facility and is tied to the weapons program at Fort Detrick. There's too many coincidences here
Right.
that all these ands could have happened. You just do the probability, and it's like 0.0001% or something like that, or less. There's
Right.
no way that this was naturally selected in nature. Now, what happened is that they used molecular biology. They used molecular techniques in the lab for recombination. Some of it is restrictive enzyme recombination. Some of it was CRISPR, because you got to remember there's different phases of development here, and they did cell selection. So they let cells do some of the random recombination. But if you infect tens of thousands of cells in a petri dish, eventually you're going to get what you're looking for. And then you do further development on that line. And that's what happened. So once they did in vitro, then they did in vivo. So once they were able to cell select what they were looking for high affinity ACE2 receptor, or whatever receptor line that they were looking for at that time, we're referencing the 2008 paper, which is, the ACE2 jump, ACE2 receptor, human ACE2 receptor jump. But from there, they were able to then do in vivo studies and infect primates,
Right.
and further develop,
and the time
further
we
enhance.
exactly, and the time we've seen it, they've already done all kinds of stuff by then. They made all sorts of progress.
Exactly, and that's why I said there's hundreds of versions of this
Exactly.
at different phases that are in a freezer.
Right. And by the way, before we go forward with any of this, I did have a question. Well, not me personally, but a question from the chat. I believe it's 6 Sigma 6. He says, does Paul think CV-19 is a mask to cover financial collapse?
I don't think it's a mask to cover it. I think it's a catalyst to allow for the collapse.
Maybe a Trojan horse of sorts.
Yeah. No, I think it's like, see, I think this crisis is it's multidimensional, but one of the dimensions is to create a financial collapse to expedite the decashing. Because if you expedite the decashing, then now everyone's in a digital wallet. The Federal Reserve is controlling the money supply completely digitally. There's no dollars or coins, and they can go negative interest rates, and you can't take your money out of the bank because it's all digital. I mean, yeah, you can pretend to think that you're taking your money out of, let's say, J.P. Morgan and putting it into Citibank, but the reality is it's all the same money system.
Right.
So
and we're getting there. These smart cities, it's coming to America.
Yeah,
very soon.
Cities. Yeah, and what it is it's totalitarian cities.
It's crazy. It's crazy, and we're following the lead of China, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
For those who forgot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, and what's even it's even weirder is that you start watching this whole BLM/Antifa movement that's going on across America, and they're starting to burn everything down.
Yeah.
And forcing whites to kneel on the ground and ask for forgiveness for white privilege and the atrocities.
Are you seeing that out there in New York, by the way?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like, it's very reminiscent of what was going on during the Mao Reformation in China in the 50s, where they were trying to reprogram the society into communism. And Paul Joseph Watson has a channel on YouTube, and he's kind of a funny guy, Brick. And he had a great video about this connection between the history of Mao early on and how that revolution was happening and what's going on in the United States today. That we are seeing an infiltration.
I'm waiting for the bread lines, to be honest, like the old days.
Well, I mean, in some cities they have them.
It feels like that, yeah.
Yeah. It's
What a wild time, Paul. I would have never imagined this in 2020. That's for sure.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean,
good Lord.
No. I said we're living in strange times.
What the hell happened?
We're everything is speeding up towards a big event. Now the question is I've mentioned on my show, and maybe I've mentioned on your show, I'm not sure, but there's this battle of the beast. I call it the beast. This beast is growing, and the beast has these different appendages, all right, arms, legs, the head. So depending on what kind of person an individual is that's on the negative side, they're part of this beast. Now, if they are an individual that is orchestrating this negative event, they are the head of the beast. But individuals that are just placating to the whims of the events and not really fighting against the event like we are, they're kind of like the hands and the legs of the beast, allowing it to move because they're not willing to fight the beast. And I view this as more of a metaphysical event that's taking place, but you see it in the physical.
So this is like a spiritual battle to you, Paul.
Yeah, I see this as a metaphysical battle. It's a spiritual battle between good and evil, and that the ones that are evil want to erode the Constitution, the idea of self-determination, the idea of we the people. They want the servants.
Yeah, the old good versus evil. It's very true.
So I do see this as a religious battle. What was interesting is I found it very, very interesting how Ruth Ginsburg dies on Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, she died. That's for sure.
Yeah, she died yesterday.
You made a video
first
of
night
that.
of Rosh Hashanah this year was yesterday.
Yeah, you made a video of that, and some people got mad at you.
Well,
they thought you were like celebrating her death.
Well, the thing is that no, it wasn't celebrating her death.
I didn't think that, but some people did.
No, here the thing is that if they're an ultra liberal, they're going to think that if you say anything negative about Ruth Ginsburg,
oh, of course, yeah,
that you're celebrating her death.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the reality of it. She was, first of all, she wasn't the first female justice. O'Connor was. All right. So, but O'Connor didn't get as much credit. To my understanding, O'Connor was the first justice, but she didn't get as much credit because she was a Republican. See, Ruth Ginsburg was the first Democrat that female that was elected to the court, the Supreme Court. But what's important with Ginsburg was that she, during her career, really pushed for women's rights. And I remember, my mother, working in the 70s and in the early 80s, before, she just raised the children, and she just, became a stay-at-home mom. But, she was a career type woman in the 70s. And it was difficult for women to build a career in the 70s. It was Ruth Ginsburg and people like her that raised the awareness of civil liberties for women, especially in the workplace. All right. And she did an amazing job that was important. But the point that I was making is that the progressive movement these days went too far. And now they're clapping in courthouses about late-term abortions. And they all hide it under the idea of women's rights. See, where was Ruth Ginsburg? Ruth Ginsburg was, had a light shined on her when she was saying, women's rights. But she didn't say anything about the unborn. where do you delineate where you need to start saying the Constitution applies to the unborn? Is it the first trimester? Is it the second? It's the third? It sure isn't right after birth. It's sure not right after birth.
Yeah.
Right? There's a certain point that it's in utero.
And
But
Paul, let
she didn't
me.
say it. She didn't make any statement on that. And here, that's where the progressive movement has gone so wrong, because they do not want they want to celebrate death and destruction. They don't want to celebrate life. The facts are this.
So you're pro-life, by the way.
I'm pro-life.
Pro-life. So you don't agree with any sort of abortion at all.
Well,
anti-abortion.
Let me explain my position.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
This is interesting now. Go ahead.
Yeah. So let me explain my position. When I was younger, in my 20s, I'm 48 now. But when I was younger, in my 20s, I didn't really care about the debate.
Well, you wouldn't think about it, yeah.
It's a woman's issue.
It's a woman's thing.
Whatever they want. All right. So I didn't even pay any attention to it.
Right.
All right. So, but as I started pursuing medicine and started learning about the development of a child, the fetus,
the brain development,
different stages,
right,
and all this.
Right.
And then I started watching the legislatures in the different states, especially in New York, where they were cheering after they passed legislation for after birth abortions. After birth abortions. That means the child has been born, and then they anesthetize the child.
That's a little much.
Yeah, and they clapped. You would think, well, it would have been a solemn.
Yeah, maybe that's not appropriate to clap for
clapped.
that one. Yes.
So they were promoting death.
That's not good.
That's when I said, that's when I woke up and I said, you know what? That we have to set a point somewhere in utero where the constitutional rights have to be protected for the unborn. Now, with that said, it gets muddy. I'm not all, it's not so simple as just pro-life or pro-abortion.
It's not a black and white issue. I agree.
Right. Because there are cases where, and it's rare, but there are cases where if the child is born, the mother could die. So what do you do? If you're in that case, you may terminate the pregnancy to be able to save the mother's life. So that is an abortion procedure. So I'm for that because it's trying to save the mother's life.
I agree.
It's an emergency situation. Now,
sure.
In the case of during development, you don't know fully some of the deformities until the second trimester. Well, at that point, there needs to be a discussion by the physician and, with the parents. Do you want to continue the pregnancy because we are seeing in the ultrasound or through the, other testing that this child may have these types of deformities? Do you want to bring that child into the world and deal with those things? Let the parents make the decision. All right. That's a deformity issue. Okay. So I am for them to make that decision, but I am against
late-term abortion.
Late-term abortion where they knew long, way in advance, the condition of the child. And they decided, you know what? I just don't want the child anymore, and then they did this. They end the life of the child, and this comes close to my heart because as I progress through my medical training, I have to learn how to do this procedure. So
you're gonna have to learn how to do that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my.
So yeah. So I mean, that's what I'm. Why I'm so.
Well, you're passionate.
Because I have to go through. I want to be a surgeon, so I have to go through different surgical procedures.
Well, by the way, Paul, let me just stop you there and backtrack for a moment. For those that are new and just listening to you now, Doctor, one of the reasons why you even got into this and started to consider your health and all these other things in life is because of your brother, correct?
Yes,
and your
my brother
family.
died. Right.
Yeah, go ahead and
My
tell.
brother,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, my brother died from heart disease at age 36 while I was working on my PhD in finance. So I'm a doctor in finance, and after I finished my doctoral studies in finance and did a little bit of postdoctoral work, I decided to pursue medicine. So I'm, in that process. But there's a long history on my mother's side of heart disease, and I had uncles that passed away in between 35 and 46. My mother had her first heart attack at age 40. So it's a definite problem. I'm Jewish, so there's this long lineage of Levites
Oy
on my
vey.
mother's side. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir.
And on my mother's side,
Mhm.
that because of genetic drift, because for a long time only Levites would marry Levites, or only Cohens would marry Cohens. So there was a genetic drift over
Ah,
the centuries, and it just so happens that on my mother's side that we have this heart problem. I
yeah.
don't have it, luckily,
Knock on wood.
but yeah, but it really kicks it. The disease really kicks off if you have a very high carbohydrate um, diet, and then all of a sudden the weight gain starts, and the blood pressure is uncontrollable, and then all of a sudden you start getting blockage and a lot of inflammation, and if you don't have the stents, the PCI, then what will happen is that you'll have a minor heart attack, and then about 1 month to 3 months later, then you have another major heart attack that causes death. But I viewed it as I'm healthy. I was always into the whole antioxidant, exercise kind of thing early on in life,
So
and
that was
I'm lucky.
that was the catalyst for you, in other words. The death
Yeah,
of
I mean,
your, yeah.
I saw my uncles and dying when I was young. I mean, when I was my first uncle died when I was just before I had my bar mitzvah, so just before age 13. So, from age 13 or age 12 and a half onward, I saw relatives dying at young ages, and even cousins that, had these heart attacks, but then were luckily rushed to the emergency room and had the stents at age 40. My other cousin had a triple bypass at age 50.
Damn.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's
Serious
definitely
stuff.
yeah, it's definitely a serious problem.
Right.
But I view it as I was lucky, and I have the energy and the desire to pursue medicine, to try to help people that have similar conditions.
Yeah, that's admirable of you, Paul.
Well, I appreciate that.
You've been
It's
going
a
hard
it's a
every day, Paul, trying to smarten people up.
yeah. I hope it inspires younger individuals to go into medicine to try to help people for whatever reason, either, because of a loved one dying from cancer, or going through COPD or heart disease or whatever, or even, dementia, or, I'll tell you, it's not an easy process to go through medicine, but, it'd be, I guess us talking about this, it informs the public to try to be healthier, but also to inspire into other individuals to maybe pursue medicine to try to help people.
That'd be
Either
good.
being a nurse, or a physician assistant, or a physical therapist, or an MD, or whatever capacity.
Yeah, we need more people like you out there trying to smarten people up about their health. And of course, I feel horrible for the younger generations out there having lost so much in such a short time. Those who are looking forward to all sorts of things like their graduation or parties or whatever
Hmm.
they had planned out for their graduations, high school students and college students alike, even kids in like kindergarten. I feel terrible for all of the younger generations out there, Paul, having to deal with something like this. It reminds me that um, everything can change in such a short period of time. Life can change in an instant, Paul.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, honestly, if my brother didn't pass away while I was, working on my PhD, I wouldn't have gone into medicine.
Exactly.
I mean, it was that inflection point that completely moved me in a totally different trajectory. And what's interesting is that my theoretical framework for my PhD to modeling financial markets was using chaos theory. So in chaos theory, you have a complex system, it's moving in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden something perturbates the system and the whole system moves in a totally different direction. So how do you apply that to what's going on with COVID-19? The society was moving in a certain direction right before Wuhan crisis, or we thought our society was moving in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden the crisis happens, and now half of our economy is shut down.
Yeah.
People are laid off. There's a big percentage of the population that's 2 or 3 months behind on their mortgage or rent payments. Things are getting better, but they're still bad. But no one would have thought a year and a half ago that we would be in this situation. We had the best economy that the United States ever saw, historically ever.
Yeah, things were going pretty good.
Now we're seeing at least statistically the worst economic disaster that the United States has ever seen. I think at least anecdotally, probably the Great Depression was worse.
Yeah, this is why I was telling you, I'm waiting for the bread lines, Paul, out there.
Yeah, there is a disconnect between what we feel with this crisis financially and what the individuals felt during the Great Depression. But statistically, number of people out of work and the amount of debt that was created relative to per capita GDP is much worse now than it was then. So it depends on how you want to parse the data. But there is, and maybe sociologists could explain the reason. I don't know the reason why there is this disconnect between the visceral feeling of the Great Depression and, quote, the visceral feeling of today. I don't know. Maybe it's due to technology.
Maybe yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I did have a friend ask me, Paul, just recently, and this is a guy I've known my whole life. And I even played in a band with this guy at one time. I consider him my best friend. And never in my life do I recall this guy ever asking me if I ever felt depressed in my life, Paul. Wow. He's the last guy in the world I would ever expect to read a text message that says, Michael, how are you? Do you feel depressed right now? I said, no, not at all. His name's Eric. I said, not at all, Eric. I wouldn't even describe how I feel as being depressed. More like just shocked and just stunned with the rest of the world just at a standstill right now over what's going on. But no, certainly not depressed. But I feel like people that, like my friend Eric, he's someone who goes out to bars. He's very, very social. He's out there, out and about. This is a guy with tattoos on his face. So he's out there. So
what kind of band were you in?
I was in a punk rock band, a punk ska band, a lifetime ago. But so I love my friend, and I feel bad for him because he's feeling like shit. He's taking it bad, and I'm just wondering about the rest of the world, America, for example. How are they feeling? The psychological effects of this lockdown, I'm sure, is affecting everyone at a different rate, I would imagine, Paul.
Yeah, the thing is, the sociological and the psychological effects of this crisis are going to be long lasting. And there's going to be many research papers and many dissertations that could, drill down deep into what's going on. Different people are affected by the crisis differently. For me, I would use the term frustrated. I'm frustrated, and I feel that I have an urge to try to stop it.
That's a good way to describe it. Frustrated.
Yeah. So so my reaction is a sense of urgency and reactivity, while others may feel depressed and they are more insular. Others, might go, oh, I don't care. At least I don't have to go to work, and I'm just playing on the the PlayStation.
Or just
So
online.
different people are going to view it differently.
Yeah.
But depression in this scenario needs to be talked about, and friends need to kind of like see the signs. And if someone is showing signs of depression, the friends, the family members need to reach out and communicate with that individual, because you don't know, they can go down a very dark path, and that dark path may lead to death.
Yeah, maybe you need to hang out with the guy.
Yeah.
And you go visit him.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's not possible because of distance, in different states or whatever. But if it was an old friend that reached out to you, but they're in a different state, and they're starting to, talk about, some depressive things.
Yeah, he's about an hour
episodes, away. You gotta like get on Zoom or Skype and just talk to him.
I gotta talk to the guy.
Yeah,
because that was weird.
What it is it's like it's kind of almost a call for help. It's a sense of like saying, hey, I need someone to talk to.
Damn.
That's what that is.
That's probably what that was. Holy shit. Yeah. You're probably right.
And because you guys were in a band and, you were close and, and it's like that was, that was the person that he felt at that time that he needed to reach out to. You need to, people, if anyone takes anything out of this episode today, if you see someone or hear someone that that seems to be getting in a depressed episode because of this crisis, help them, talk to them. It will get better. It gets better when we all work together and not fight each other. But you got to realize the signs. That we don't see people's faces anymore. They're covered up. We're stuck at home. We're not socializing at work. All this stuff.
Yeah, we're all dressed like ninjas.
Yeah, we're all dressed up like ninjas, and people aren't going out to eat anymore and socializing or going to the bar or whatever. So people can get depressed if they're used to being around people, and some people don't need that. Some people prefer to be alone, and these types of people probably would flourish in this kind of environment. But there's others that they like to be around 5 or 6 people or 10 people or 12 people on a regular basis. And in an environment that we're in right now, that hurts their type of personality, and it slowly erodes, and they get depressed. And I'll tell you, when someone reaches out, you used to be close to, an old friend or whatever, use that as a signal. It's like, wait a minute, they need some help. Reach out to them and help them.
You're gonna have to text them after this show now.
Yeah, I mean, because you don't know where, usually when someone's talking on the surface, it may seem somewhat benign, but then after an hour discussion, you might hear something that he reveals.
Yeah, you're right.
That's more serious.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I definitely will send him a text message after the show and see what's going on with the guy. Press him a little bit here.
I mean, humans need the human connection. That's why I was like, I'm so against the whole transhumanist movement, because it's so anti-human. It's transhuman. You're as the singularity types, articulate it. You're evolving from the human experience.
Yeah, what makes you human?
Merging, and you're merging into technology. You're being transhuman and then eventually post-human.
And machines don't have emotions.
Right. And they go, well, don't you want that because you'll be able to live longer and have, bionic strength and all this stuff. But there is something to be said about the human experience.
Right.
There's, and did you ever see Lawnmower Man?
Oh my God. It's ironically enough, I had posted an image of the poster of that movie on my Patreon a couple of...
oh, really?
Yes. I did see it recently, and I thought, my God, this movie is still awesome after all this time.
Right. So, basically, for the ones that haven't seen it, there's this kind of like basically an idiot that's being
Idiot
tested on.
savant.
Well, I no, not he wasn't an idiot savant yet. He was just an idiot.
He was just an idiot. Okay.
He was just an idiot. And there's this doctor that is using virtual reality and some drugs to stimulate his brain, his cortex, and that he's learning quicker. So he becomes he basically is getting smarter.
Yeah.
And he's getting smarter quicker and quicker and quicker, to the point where he's smarter than the doctor. And then he actually goes and becomes transhuman. He merges with the machine.
Sounds like that's what Elon Musk wants to do.
Yeah. So, and then eventually he becomes, the weird thing is that as he gets smarter and is becoming more aware that he can control the environment, he becomes godlike, and he gets a god complex.
Right.
So a lot of these singularity types, they have god complexes. Even when you think about the admin rights, with the individuals that are controlling databases or networks, you have this super user, access or whatever. There's like this the Uber mention, the Superman. These are all concepts of transhumanist, post-humanist ideas, where the humanism, from their perspective, is lowly, that it's a lower version of evolution, and that you need to elevate to transhumanism and become godly. So I'm against that.
You're against that.
I'm against this. Yeah, I'm totally against the singularity. And
so Paul, let me ask you this really.
Humanist.
Let me ask you this really quickly, Paul. If I approached you, this is a hypothetical question. If I approached you, Paul, and I said, "Hey, Paul, I have this pill here, and if you take this pill, Paul, it will extend your life to 120 years plus, perhaps," you wouldn't be willing to take this pill?
Well, it depends on what's in it.
Well, let's just say it was completely safe.
Let's say what's the mode of action?
Well, let's just say it was it's just something that's just gonna increase the years of your life. It's gonna make you feel like you are let's say a teenager again for another 120 years. Let's say back to your 18-year-old self, Paul, for another 120 years.
No, this is a good question, because from age 16, because of the experience that I saw with the early deaths of my uncles.
Yeah.
I've been very pro antioxidant oriented. So, I've been exercising and taking lots of antioxidants.
Good.
So, and as technology has improved, like with C60, and fullerenes and how they are much stronger antioxidants than, let's say, vitamin C or vitamin E. The compound effect of antioxidants leads to a better, healthy body that leads to longevity. So I am, in a way, already doing what you're just saying, but I'm doing it in a very slow, methodical, compounded way. And one of the lessons learned from Lawnmower Man is you can't speed up things, because if you speed up things too fast, you don't get to enjoy. I'm trying to use, from my memory, one of the lines in the movie. There is such a thing as enjoying the book, learning to, as you're reading the book and enjoying the book.
The process, yeah.
The process of reading the book, instead of just speed reading it through, and not really enjoying that book.
Or another way for the younger listeners out there, using cheat codes in a video game, right?
Right. So there is something to be said about the process of being human. So in a way, I'm already taking externally things that will make longevity a higher probability for me.
Yeah.
But if someone said, here's a pill and it's going to rewire your brain with microchips and you will be able to memorize things 10,000 times faster than you do now, and you'll be part of the board.
An anti-aging agent, basically, yes.
Then no.
You'd be against it, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would be against it. See, whatever you're taking, do you have autonomy after? No, then it's not worth it. Are you becoming part of? Are you human? Or are you becoming less human? If you're taking antioxidants and you're trying to get rid of senescent cells or increase the apoptotic, cells that should go through apoptosis, then that's more human. But if you're rewiring and putting in a lot of artificial things into your body for longevity, and you become more bionic,
subhuman,
then no, I wouldn't want that. I mean, at what point? I mean, think about it. At what point? And I think the philosophers talk about this.
And we're coming to this point too, and future technology. We're kind of reaching that point right now, as we mentioned earlier. Elon Musk, who I'm sure wants to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it. Just do a mind experiment, literally a mind experiment. At what point of how much do your brain has to be artificial before you're not human?
Right.
Let's say you had a brain injury.
Yeah.
In the frontal cortex, and that we had a technology where they could put a chip that does all the activity that damaged ischemic tissue, had. Okay. Now keep on adding more and more of ischemic tissue of the brain and adding more and more chips. At what point would you say that brain is no longer human? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? There's some point where if your cortical tissue is no longer human, but artificial, then your brain isn't human. You follow me?
I'm following you.
So what point is that?
Right.
And then you can say the same thing about the rest of the body.
I'm just thinking you
lose your arm and you have a bionic arm. Well, what happens if you lose all of your limbs? Now you have all bionic limbs. Well, what happens if you no longer have a working digestive system and all of it's artificial or bionic? At what point would you say that person is a robot versus a human?
And we're coming to that point too. I mean, we're only a few years away, I imagine, Paul, where these sort of conversations are most likely have already taken place. Man always wants to play God.
Yeah,
we have a habit of that.
Here's the thing: is that there's 3 levels of I guess understanding or wisdom. It's the knowledge, learning about how to do something, the understanding when you're implementing that, and then the wisdom after it's been implemented. Mankind is in that realm of, we've kind of surpassed the understanding part, and we're surpassed the knowledge part, and we're in the understanding part, but we're not wise. We don't have that wisdom to say, yes, we could do this, but it doesn't mean that we should do it. Like, for example, going back to COVID-19, we had the ability and still have the ability to create super viruses in the lab. But that doesn't mean we should be.
Right.
And that's where we didn't have the wisdom to say no. We didn't have the bioethics to say no, that if the negative externality is so bad that if the black swan does happen, it would hurt the economy and people's lives in such a negative fashion that it's not worth the risk. And we didn't use that's why I've been so adamant about holding the people accountable.
Yeah, you've been talking a lot about the bio weapons that we have here in America. The bio,
right?
Yeah,
it's this the bioweapon
yes
program in the United States And the Biopatriot Act that they're instituting, the road, our civil liberties they are one or the same. They're together. They're coupled together. And what we're doing is that we're playing with fire, and the people that are playing with the fire want the fire to happen, so they institute these social orders for control. And we have to have more people that are educated about what's really going on and say no. See, I kept on complaining on my channel about the BLM movement. It's like, okay, yes, there are atrocities with police brutality.
Sure.
But it's not as common as what they're saying it is.
Not
it's
at all.
Not.
No.
Black on black crime is way thousands.
It's way higher.
Higher than police officer on black crime. So and not only that, when we were talking about abortions, the abortion numbers are a lot higher in black communities too.
Statistically,
no one talks
yes.
about that. So no one talks about it. But the reality of the situation is that everyone was focused on the protesting, with police brutality. No one's protesting about the atrocities of the Defense Department and the biological agents that they've developed.
Yes, the bioweapons.
And how the NIH was funding Wuhan gain of function for their weapons program. So, I mean, it's like, don't you think? And we have over 180,000 individuals that died from COVID-19 in the United States alone. And don't you think people should be out there protesting that?
I agree.
Than George Floyd?
Big time. Their priorities are a little skewed there.
It's messed up. It's messed up.
And that's thanks to the media, of course.
Well, it's that plus, there are big guys that are, like George Soros, that are funding these organizations.
You can't even say his name on Fox News. That's what I saw.
I just he's, his fund owns so many different companies, that because of the ad revenue, you piss them off, you're not going to get the funding.
That should tell you everything, though. That should tell you everything when someone on Fox News, an anchor, brings up George Soros. I think it was like Lindsey Graham or someone who mentioned him. And the Fox anchors were just not going there. They moved on real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So that should tell you everything.
He's another one of those individuals like Ruth Ginsburg that, that the world will be a better place once they're dead.
RGB.
Yeah, just like, and Ruth Ginsburg is not even in the same league as Soros. Soros is a lot more sinister.
And a lot more money too.
Yeah.
By the way, before we jump right back into biological agents here, I did want to quickly mention to you, Paul. Sure, it's been very hectic and negative, a very hectic and negative time during all of this and in our lives, everyone's lives. But there has been some good that came with this whole ordeal, personally speaking, of course. And it hasn't been all sunshines and rainbows for most of America. But I've had some moments of clarity during the pandemic. I've really taken this time to consider my life and those around me. I pretty much learned what really does matter in life and really what doesn't, Paul. I hope you've done the same thing during this time.
That's a good point that you're making. The ones that are, let's say, more wise, they're going to take this as an opportunity to reassess their life and trim away, prune back, the stuff they don't need in their life, either the physical or the emotional. So you're right. I mean, that's the wise perspective, that you're demonstrating. For me, it's galvanizing myself to really push for my medical studies and to try to help people the best.
You've been going hard, Paul. Every day you were out there pushing out content. So I mean, again, that's very admirable of you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I do too much of it. I don't know, but I've been trying. I'm very worried about the erosion of our civil liberties. And,
I know.
I'd look back at, like, I don't know if you've been listening to some of my channel and
We're
talking
gonna,
about
I'm gonna bring that up in a moment here, but yes, go ahead.
my grandfather, and uncles and my father and brother. I mean, they all served in the military.
That's right.
They all, they put their life on the line in different situations throughout this country's history to protect what we call the Constitution. And I think it's just, even though I didn't serve in the military, I have a lot of family members that did.
That did, yeah.
And I just, I view it as just an obligation, the best that I can, in the time that I'm living in, and what can I do for my country? And this is one of those things.
It's a public service.
Yeah.
Yes.
But trimming away the unneeded stuff in your life, emotionally and physically. Yeah. This is a great opportunity to, like, sit back. It's almost like the Jubilee. The Great Jubilee is happening, even though it was forced upon us. But the Great Jubilee of taking stock in your life and thinking back, do I really need this? Do I really want to go down this path? Do I really, is this really what I want to be doing the next 20 years or whatever?
Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of people are sitting back and going, what's more important in their lives?
This is the time now. It's gut check time, Paul. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. No, I agree
if you're not happy with your life or with the job that you have, now is the time to take action.
Right. I totally. This is the perfect time to reinvent yourself.
Just do everything you can to get another gig. That's for sure. If you hate everything right now, you got to pick up a trade or something.
Right.
And now
it's also a realization that people are, because of modern convenience, we've lost the skills to go camping or hiking or kayaking or boating or fishing or hunting or whatever. We've lost some of those, like, natural skills
we have, yeah.
Our grandfathers had, and their fathers had. The modern society of, go to the grocery store and get your, wrapped up chicken.
That's funny.
It's just that people can start learning and getting more connected to nature now.
They should.
And when they do that, this is why, since you used to be in a band, some of the great wisdoms of Ted Nugent. He's a Michigan guitar player, great guitar player.
Some good riffs there, yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I'll tell you, he talks about hunting and how important it was and how it allowed him to stay grounded, being a rock star and being around people that were, doing drugs and doing destructive behavior. And he didn't go down that path.
Yeah, he wasn't a drug user, that's for sure.
No. Right. And, but he attributes it to hunting. He said, being connected with nature and going bow hunting and, it gave him a sense of wanting to live because he was connected to the cycle of life.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
When you're not connected to the cycle of life, you're disconnected. You don't know. And then people reach out to try to be connected, but it's all artificial because they're going down the wrong path. But he was right. It's like, if you're connected with nature, go fishing and hunting and camping or whatever, but just don't be just locked up at home. There is so much nature out there to enjoy. And you'll find that you'll become more human instead of this technocracy that we built around us.
Right. And of course, now that brings us back to the nitty-gritty here and back to the Wuhan lab. And of course, again, just to backtrack here for those that are just joining us live, me and Dr. Paul have been talking about COVID-19 for the last 6 months now, it seems. I believe that was the first time you were here. And since the last time you were here, Paul, in terms of COVID-19, your position obviously has not changed at all since we first talked.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. We both are in agreement that this did come from a lab in Wuhan, but perhaps it was maybe even started here at Fort
Hmm.
Detrick. But
Right.
America has a long history of using biological warfare. Even, well, I mean, you can even go back to the pre-Christian era, around like 300 BC. The Greeks, they used animal cadavers, I remember, to contaminate water wells of the enemies.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
maybe China did
Exactly.
this for the same purpose, my friend.
That's right.
You never
That's
know.
right.
Unless, but what you were saying recently, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier when we first talked about your channel, and you were talking about Dr. Li Ming Yan. She made the claims that she has evidence proving that COVID-19 was made in a lab in Wuhan, and the Chinese government purposely released the virus. You have a very different opinion on the matter. You say that she's like the opposition. She's a plant, in other words, being
Hmm.
paid off by our government. Pick it
Hmm.
up right there, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah. This is she she is only saying one side of a very sugar coated story. All right. Because the US is trying to position, because you got to remember what's her demographic. She's from Hong Kong. Her husband is Indian. There
Exactly.
is there is a conflict if people are paying attention. That's why I keep on saying it's a geopolitical play too. It's not just a biological one. And there is a conflict between the border of India and China. They are killing soldiers. All right. So we have this situation. They want to control Hong Kong, and they want to control Taiwan, and they want to move and control the first island chains before 2025. This comes right out of the PLA and President Xi's mouth. All right. So this is well known by the Naval Academy and the military planners of the Pentagon. With that said, the United States wants is looking for someone that is that has that correct demographic. Scientist, she's an MD, PhD. She worked at WHO in the lab. She had access to specimens, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 specimens. She's Hong Kong. She's Hong Kongese, and she has some connection to individuals that are tied to India. Her husband's tied to India. Okay, so she is propped up by the State Department to spin a story that's a CCP virus. Now we have to go back to when Epoch News did the documentary about, and they called it the CCP virus, and they spun it that it was released from the Wuhan facility. True statement. That was developed by China. Yes, that's a true statement, but it was further developed in China. But the genesis of the program was at Fort Detrick, and but the Epoch Times mentions about the early genesis, but downplays it. Okay, because they wanted to spin it that it was a CCP virus. Okay, so she comes out on Bannon's show about a month ago, Dr. Li Ming Yan, and she's kind of practicing her lines. You can kind of see
Ah,
it with
okay.
Steve Bannon's show. So she's doing this, and you got to remember, Steve Bannon is funded by Guo, and Guo is very anti-CCP. All right. I'm anti CCP. I want the CCP to fall.
We
I
all
want
are.
real democracy to happen in China. I'm not against the Chinese people, but I am against the CCP taking over Hong Kong and taking over Taiwan and the rest of the island chains and creating, World War III and trying to, check our hegemonic power in the Pacific that my grandfather fought for, during World War II. I want the CCP to fall.
Sure.
So she is kind of like the State Department's sound piece to try to inform the public in the mass media, in the mainstream media, that this came from China. It was a weapons program from China. The
Yes.
real story is this. Dr. Shi, in 2005, she's Batwoman, Dr. Shi investigated bats out of a cave to understand, with other scientists, especially Pyong Zhao, and to understand why it was hiding under the immune system, how it could live with that host, how SARS could live with that host. And then they did the experiments, the Chimera experiments in 2007. That happened to show, this point is very important for your listeners now to pay attention to. That experiment showed to get gain of function to human ACE2 receptors, you needed HIV homology. How much of it depended on how much of the affinity. All right? That got the ears of the State Department, and Fauci comes in. Now, you got to remember, Fauci was a leading researcher in HIV. Birx and Redfield were leading researchers for an HIV vaccine in 1990.
I want to ask you about AIDS in a moment here, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the experiment in 2007 that was published in 2008, that's the Genesis paper, showed that you needed HIV homology. So there's further development from 2008 to 2014. All right. Between, with Dr. Shi and others like Dr. Dr. Barrick and others that did further development. And they released some papers that were talking about gain of function and how it could jump species, especially with MERS. There was a MERS paper, which is the Middle Eastern version of SARS.
Right.
All right. Back in 2015. But 2008 and 2015, Dr. Shi and U.S. researchers were doing a DART program. That was where they were doing gain of function and doing the backwardation and allowing for further development and gain of function with the ACE2 receptor, and I believe other receptors, because this virus infects 4 or 5 other receptors, like the CD147, not just the ACE2. So there's other receptor gain of function, but the main one is ACE2. And that was developed in the United States. They shut down the program during Obama's administration. All right. And the funding from 2014 to 2019 came right out of Fauci's department to Wuhan for $7.4 million.
Yeah.
So, and that was a 5-year grant to Wuhan. All right. The CCP was controlling the virology lab in Wuhan for further gain of function for their weapons program. So when someone says this is a CCP virus, that's true. They continued on the development that they piggybacked from the U.S. and used U.S. money. So this is why I keep on saying that Dr. Yang is sugarcoating the real story. It is a CCP virus that was leaked out, I believe on purpose, to start a geopolitical play to be able to accelerate the control of the first island chains. I no longer believe that it was accidentally leaked out of P4. I believe it was forcefully leaked.
I believe it was on purpose.
Yeah.
Because how else? How is this an accident? You know what I mean? It's like, come on, everything is so secure, but it just happened to leak, just like anthrax just happened to leak too.
There's too many individuals. After I was talking to George Webb and his understanding of the situation with the Olympic Games and Event 201 and all this stuff, that there's too many coincidences where
too many
it points strongly to a leak. All right. Now the State Department doesn't want to go to the American public, because the American public, it's always black and white. Who's the bad guy? Well, the reality of the situation is that we were doing a development program that we shouldn't have been doing, and then we outsourced it, and China continued on the development program and leaked it out. So yes, it is a CCP virus, but it's the substrate was from the US, because the 2008 paper that showed the chimera with the early HIV homology for the jump to the human ACE2 receptor wasn't a fully functioning virus. The fully functioning virus payload had to be developed between 2008 to 2014 and have all these other lines developed.
And that
And
exactly,
all that came from the US.
and that's exactly why I think this thing traveled around. Has been worked on. Probability
and
says
what's
so.
interesting, and what's interesting, and this is what George Webb brings up, certain pieces of the development between 2008 to 2014, certain pieces of it was patented, and then and startup companies spun off out of the labs for, quote, pharmaceutical or vaccine development. Well, wait a minute. Why are you developing a vaccine where it was a virus that hasn't been zoonotically created in a cave yet?
That's right.
So this Dr. Lee Myung Yan, is sugarcoating the real story, and this is why it's so important to get the American public to realize that no, it's a CCP virus that was built upon a U.S. bioweapons program that they shut down and outsourced. They didn't just shut it down; they outsourced it. And there is a money trail that goes right to Fauci, and this is why I keep on saying that it's so important to start investigating and prosecuting. And if found guilty, Fauci, Birx, and Redfield need to be hung from a tree for being a traitor and going against the Nuremberg Code.
Amazing. I agree, though. I think they should be charged for something, if in fact that is the case. If it's true.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
they
a
should go
bombshell.
to a trial, and if found guilty, they should hang from a tree.
I agree with you on that one. I can't argue about that. And also another thing
What's
too.
amazing is that these three people, Birx, Redfield, and Fauci, are all telling us, wear the mask, don't take your vitamin C, and oh, by the way, sit at home and get COVID-19 fat and
Yes.
take your vaccine when it's ready.
Yes, and that brings me to another point. I'm glad you mentioned that. The CDC has been talking about a vaccine. What exactly is your opinion on that? Donald Trump was just talking about it recently, saying by, I think, April, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, well, here's my take on the vaccines. You got to look at it from the biological perspective, and you got to look at it from the geopolitical perspective. And it's not so easy to articulate the geopolitical play. There are about 4 different major companies that are developing a vaccine. There's like really 20, but there's 4 major contenders. Okay, you got Moderna, which is the messenger RNA vaccine that's highly connected to Fauci and his patents. All right, and this is the early stuff that was leaking out of Fort Detrick for the startups. Then you have, and that vaccine has never been proven. That's a new platform that's never long-term proven to have high efficacy and not have long-term negative externalities in the body, like turn off tumor suppressors or something. It's never been used, so I don't want a new platform. Then you have the AstraZeneca / Oxford vaccine. That's the DNA vaccine. DNA vaccines have been proven out for different other vaccines. So that kind of technology, there's much more data to show the efficacy. That recently went back to clinical trials, but about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, they had to shut down the clinical trials because they had one patient within the clinical trials that ended up getting neurological dysfunction. But then they restarted it up. So that's back on track. Then you have, and I forgot the company's name, but it's in Russia.
Oh yeah, they have a
is
vaccine.
also using the DNA, kind of like their DNA version.
They're going to call it Sputnik, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, love that.
But I think the name of the company starts with an M. I can't remember. It's in one of my notes. I don't remember. But there is a Russian version. All right. Now, then there's CanSino. That's the Chinese one. All right. Now this is where now all of them have stated in the literature that there are side effects. All right. That you do get antibody presentation or an immune response when you're getting the vaccine, but for some of the patients in the clinical trial, they're getting adverse side effects that have similarities to some of that early cytokine storm problem, but not as bad as the animal testing that was taking place early on. So early on, there was some animal testing for these vaccines where you gave them the vaccine, you waited a little bit, and then you gave them the virus. The animals ended up being worse off than the ones that didn't have the vaccine because of there was a cytokine storm when presented with the virus, that the antibodies produced too much of an immune response, and it hurt the animal. But they think they worked out that problem. But some of these patients, some of these patients are showing some signs of this. But as the development for these vaccines progress, the efficacy seems to be showing some positive signs. So that's the biological side of it. Again, I'm against the Moderna vaccine because it's a messenger RNA platform that's not been proven out long term. If I had to take a vaccine, I'd prefer a DNA vaccine versus a messenger RNA vaccine because of that.
So you're not going to take this vaccine when it first gets rolled out, in other words, right?
Hell no.
Good job.
No,
yeah, I wouldn't either.
There's no way. If I don't want the vaccine, period. And this goes to another topic. All right, but I want to talk about the geopolitical first, because it's important to understand herd immunity. Because with herd immunity, you don't need to take the vaccine. And it's an important point that I've been making on my channel that Fauci doesn't want to mention. But it's very important based on my observations of what's going on in New York. But the geopolitical play is this. Whoever gets the vaccine to market first, and this is why it's warp speed with Trump, it's really not so much for our economy or to help our citizens. It's to be able to wave a vaccine to the satellite countries in Asia that are in the orbit of China. Because if China gets it to market first, then the Philippines are going to want the vaccine from China, and China will have the strings attached. While if we get it first, then we can give it to the Philippines, and China doesn't have that hegemonic power or those strings attached to the satellite countries.
I see.
So it's a geopolitical play. That is far more important in the eyes of the Pentagon than if Susie and Johnny in America are vaccinated.
The vaccine race of our century.
Right. There's an arms race.
This is wild.
To control the satellite countries in Asia.
This is the new Cold War.
Yeah, and that's why China keeps on saying their vaccine is far more developed than everybody else.
By the way, did you see those photos of them out there in China having that pool party?
No, I didn't see that.
A big ass celebration out there, saying they defeated the COVID-19 virus. They were a giant pool party.
So there's chatter in Asia that those record building the hospitals in record time.
Yeah, I recall.
So a lot of people were thinking, well, that was just to treat the patients. Well, the chatter is this: CanSino, Because if you look at some of the pictures from inside, it looked like a prison.
Mm-hmm.
CanSino, the chatter is that CanSino was actually vaccinating patients back then.
Oh,
they did
wow.
because they didn't know what was going to happen, so they had to quarantine the patients.
Is that why they were destroying the buildings after?
Maybe.
Apparently,
I don't know.
Allegedly, these buildings were coming down.
That I don't know.
Early on, I had read that, but you never know.
I don't know. But they build these hospitals in record time. It was like 12 days or whatever.
Yeah, I recall.
Everyone was watching it on the internet, and then so the chatter is that a big part of the facility was testing political dissidents or individuals that were somewhat compromised, and to save face or whatever, were forced vaccinated. And in the chatter that there was a good percentage of these individuals that were showing the negative effects that some of the data that's coming from Oxford and the Moderna testing. But you got to remember, China was doing it at a larger scale, and they were forcing it on individuals. It was under duress. Again, against the Nuremberg Code trial and codes, and where's the WHO on this to investigate? Nowhere. I mean, the official number from China is there are only 90,000 individuals that had COVID-19. Out of 1.4 billion people, which is impossible. So
it makes no sense.
Yeah, and they only have 4,000 people that died. No, they probably had 4,000 people died from just the forced vaccine program from CanSino.
Right.
But and they had those incinerators that were built.
I recall
40 incinerators that were running 24/7 for a while.
Are we going to see something like that again in the coming future, the coming winter? I know we've been talking about another wave coming.
Well, this is where it goes. This goes to the herd immunity concept that I wanted to mention. So in New York, because of the MTA, which is the mass transit system for the train and the buses,
yeah,
you have millions of people going daily on these systems. Okay, even with a mask, that people rub their eye, pick their nose, whatever. And they're touching stuff on the train and on the bus, all right? Out of millions of people, even a small percentage of them were sick, even asymptomatically. They could spread the virus on the mass transit, okay, theoretically. So even if it was just 1%, it's a substantial amount, even with an R0 value of 1.3 to spread, to see some sort of contagion in New York City as we were getting out of shelter in place. The reality of the situation is COVID-19, even with continued testing, COVID-19 positive cases are down. Hospitalizations are down. ICUs are down. We do not have reinfection.
Yeah, cases are going down. You're right.
Right. So that means in New York, if you get to that magic number of 19 to 23% of the population that was exposed to COVID-19 and has an antibody, you have herd immunity, because herd immunity is calculated at R0 minus 1 divided by R0. And if R0 is 1.3, it ends up being 23% of the population that needs to be infected to get herd immunity. If you have herd immunity, you don't need a vaccine. My point here is that we have in high density areas that had the early infection in the United States, we don't have any new cases, even when we get out of shelter in place. Okay? So if we keep on watching the hospitalization numbers as we reboot our economy and move to normalcy, if the hospitalization numbers are not moving up at all, then there is no reason whatsoever for a vaccine, because the population has herd immunity. But that doesn't mean that they don't release another virus that the herd immunity has antibodies for. You know, they could release a new vaccine where we would have to develop a new antibody. You know, because remember, they have hundreds of these things on the shelf with different virulence and different affinity to different receptors. So, you know, that's one issue. But if we just say just the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the one that was leaked out that people are starting to get immunity for, even as it's mutating slightly in the population, the states that do have elevated numbers. The last time we talked, there were certain states that were elevated, like Florida, Texas, Arizona, California. Those states now are starting to decline in numbers since the last we talked.
Right.
So we are now starting to see those states approach herd immunity. Now, the last numbers that I saw, Florida was at around 13 or 15% in terms of infection. So they're still below that 19 to 23% magic Goldilocks zone for herd immunity, depending on what the R0 value is for that state. So you still kind of need it to move through the population a little bit more. But the country is approaching herd immunity, assuming that there isn't some major mutation of the virus that's in the population right now, or a new release of a virus. So I think this, what I'm explaining to the public here, and what I saw in New York, and the dynamics of as we're getting out of shelter in place and there's not any reinfection in the tri-state. It's not just New York City, it's also in Connecticut, and it's also in New Jersey. So you got this whole tri-state area where there's a lot of flowing of people going back and forth. So it's not just city dwellers, but also people that are moving, that are traversing between city and suburban life. And you're not seeing new hospitalizations. So because we're not seeing that, we're approaching herd immunity. So as we're going into the fall now, to answer your question about the fall, the influenza, because everyone has been shelter in place and wearing masks, influenza, and even Fauci stated this recently on CNN, the influenza season probably will not be that bad because more people are washing their hands and covering their mouth and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
you think they're more conscious now?
I think the flu season will be not as bad as normal.
Interesting. Well, we'll find out soon enough. We are almost there. Mm-hmm. October is just around the corner. Mm-hmm. So that's when it really begins.
But the thing is don't let the mainstream media scare you into this vaccine program, because I'll tell you, you pay attention to the hospitalization numbers, because you can play with numbers when it comes to testing positive for COVID-19, because a lot of them are asymptomatic. All right. So, you have a relatively fixed population in your state. Well, if you increase the number of tests being done and you start to see more people testing positive, that doesn't mean you have an outbreak. It just means that your testing is shining a light on people that are exposed. What's the real number to pay attention to is the hospitalizations, because those are the more serious cases. And if those are going up, then you got a problem. Then that's serious. And then it's a whole different dynamic. The R0 value has now gone up, and now we need to talk about the epidemiological dynamics have changed. But we're not seeing that. And therefore, we don't need a vaccine because we're approaching herd immunity. But the mainstream media is going to spin it. Oh, it's going to be flu season. Make sure you take that flu vaccine. And, and if, once that Moderna comes out or that you make sure you get that SARS-CoV-2 vaccine too. They're going to scare you into something because the public isn't paying attention.
And Paul, let me ask you, what do you make of those individuals out there who are saying this is all a hoax, that this is just some psyop of sorts?
When you say hoax, like the virus doesn't exist?
Yes, there's some people out there who still say that.
Yeah. Well, the virus does exist. I mean, I've been privy to information from individuals that do CT scans, and I've seen the glass opacity of SARS-CoV-2 patients. And I had a friend in automotive. His cousin died from COVID-19. One of the medical students that was doing clinical rotation ended up contracting COVID-19 and dying. So this is real. People are dying from COVID-19, and then I'm not saying that this is a benign thing. It's it can be deadly for many people, but the far majority, it's not going to be deadly, right? We don't know if it's with the long-term ramifications. There's probably a dormancy because of the HIV and all this stuff.
They don't look good to me. The longevity of this.
I mean, the long-term
the scar tissue on the lungs.
Yeah, right.
Screw that, exactly. My friend. I don't want that.
The fibrotic, scarring in the lungs. That
Yeah, even if you do recover, I mean, who gives a shit? It's the long-term effects this thing has on you. That I can't believe no one is really pressing that on anyone, really.
Right. So it definitely, to answer the question shortly, it definitely exists because people have died from it.
Right.
Okay? They have died from COVID-19. And then people that will say, well, they died from other comorbidities too. Well, yeah, you could die, you die from cancer, but usually it's not really the cancer that has killed you. It's probably you probably had cardiac arrest, that actually literally killed you. But, but it was the complications of cancer that you succumb to the disease. But so it definitely exists and people have died from it. But what's important is that there's different cohorts of patients. And the ones that had the severe case, especially early on, they have a lot of fibrotic scarring, and they most likely will need a lung transplant or will have COPD or emphysema or something like it. There'll be like a SARS-CoV-2 syndrome, in the next 5 to 10 years, and they'll have pulmonary problems for the rest of their life.
It reminds me of the first responders of 9/11. Again, I mentioned that to you, and it's just, if I see it this way, why don't other people? I'm not a smart guy, but holy shit.
Well, you have a PhD in common sense.
Exactly. Good job. I like that.
That's all you got to need is just be a, Dr. Common Sense, But yeah. But so you have this one cohort of patients that had this, the severe case of fibrotic scarring or even kidney damage or heart damage or whatever. So you have those cases. Then you have the cases where, because it is a blood disease, these red blood cells were blowing up.
Yeah.
Well, so it was clotting. Well, you had a lot of infarcts and you had a lot of strokes. So you could have a stroke, have brain damage from SARS-CoV-2 because you stroked out. So you have those individuals that will need long-term, treatment. Then you have this section, that's the unknown section, where, this is a virus that downregulates, and this is important, the research that came out, that downregulates cytokines, certain cytokines, and kind of like lays dormant. It suppresses some of the T cells. So when you're doing that, it's very reminiscent of what HIV does. It downregulates the immune system. There is an acute phase of the infection, and then there's this long-term latency, and then all of a sudden the cancers start popping up. from HIV, which is what they call AIDS. That's the syndrome. So, we don't know the latency of this. This virus most likely stays inside the body, that it doesn't fully clear out. Now, what happens when it's reactivated? When there's enough stressors in the body that reactivates the virus.
Right.
So, like similar to, let's say, herpes.
Right.
You can't get rid of herpes. You can somewhat control it.
Suppress
but you
it.
get these flare-ups.
Yeah.
You can suppress it, but there's these flare-ups because of different stressors.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that there is stressors in the future that will reactivate this virus that has been laying dormant.
That's what I believe.
Yeah. And we don't know what that is. So like right now we're seeing the acute phase. We don't know the latency and the reemergent phase.
Yeah, this is all new.
Right.
People forget that.
Right.
People forget that.
Right. But the thing is, we're talking about 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Like AIDS, like AIDS. When you're infected with HIV virus, you have a chronic phase for about 6 to 9 months, and then it lays dormant, and then the cancers pop up 9, 10 years later.
Yeah, let's talk about AIDS for a moment, because I did want to mention that to you and ask you some questions about AIDS. Of course, we first officially heard of AIDS, well, most of America, back in 1981. And, that got me thinking about lots of things. And it made me wonder, what exactly are the origins of HIV exactly?
Well, I'll tell you what they tell us in medical school.
Go ahead.
And then you can extrapolate on that.
Yeah.
What they teach in school is that it was zoonotic and it came from monkeys.
Yeah.
All right. And that it was a virus that seemed to emerge in the early 70s. And that it was in conjunction with drug use in the 70s. And then so people in the United States, through drug use, kind of created an environment to let the virus take hold in the population. So there was an acute phase. Then 10 years later, or 9 years later, it starts popping up with what we would call AIDS. So the early 80s. So around 74, 73, then all of a sudden 81, you start seeing the cancers and and the lesions and all this, and the skin lesions. So that had that acute phase and that chronic phase and that big latency. So that's what they tell us in school. Now you got to go back and start thinking about, okay, what were some of the operations that were going on during that time period, especially in the 60s? Well, there was MH Chaos, Operation MH Chaos from the CIA, or if you Google it, it's maybe called Operation Chaos.
Yeah, some say this was actually created in a secret CIA laboratory.
Well, this is the point that I'm making, is that they were trying to suppress the society in the 60s.
Well, that was the sexual revolution back in the 60s.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
shit. Here we
and
go.
then there was you had the sexual revolution, and you also had the over reliance on drug abuse. The heroin trade was starting to pop up because of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So heroin was starting to flow in, and then all of a sudden, early 70s, AIDS pops up. So it wouldn't surprise me, because what seems to be a common theme with SARS-CoV-2, HIV homology, and all the people that were tied to the program for research for HIV happen to be up on stage informing the public and telling the president from their scientific point of view what we should do as a nation. I find that very odd.
In 1969, a high-level biological researcher administrator for the U.S. Defense Department, Dr. Donald MacArthur, he was talking about seeking funds, if I recall correctly. So shit, we have a long history in all this. Oh my!
I think that there's, the schools basically say this: SARS-CoV-2 came out of a cave, with a bat.
Right.
AIDS came out of the jungle
from apes,
from a monkey.
Or if you talk to a religious person, they say this was from God to punish homosexuals. Right.
But the reality of the situation is it probably was some sort of
man-made
development program, right?
Holy shit!
The thing is, and it wouldn't surprise me that Ebola falls in line with this. I think Ebola and AIDS was too deadly, that it wasn't a good weapon vector, but coronavirus, that's the common cold.
Yeah. What a perfect cover.
That yeah, exactly. There's enough smoke screen there. They can just say, obviously it came from a bat and from a cave.
Dude, we were served the Trojan horse. That's what this was. Oh my God.
I think that the more people dive into this and follow the trail between Batwoman to Fauci to the early investigators of HIV, going all the way to the operations of the CIA, you're gonna start seeing that there's a pattern.
Yeah. Wow.
And I personally have not done that investigation on the ties between HIV, the genesis of HIV, and how that matches SARS-CoV-2. But I do know this: SARS-CoV-2 has huge amounts of homology of HIV virus.
No doubt.
So that's my perspective. I just I'm just one person. There's no way I can dive in that deep for that long to find out what the genesis of HIV. And probably researchers have out there, and they've published stuff similar to what I've done for SARS-CoV-2. Maybe there are people that I could talk to that could say, oh, Paul, if you look at this paper and this paper, here's the trail.
Oh, I'm sure there's people out there.
What I did with Dr. Shi.
Yeah.
But but I just don't know the full genesis of HIV, just what I've been told in school. But there's a lot of similarity.
It's pretty shady when you look at it. It's pretty wild. And that reminds me, New York. Speaking of AIDS, New York was like the capital for a long time. Back in 78, 79, I believe.
Well, it was San Francisco and New York.
64.
Those were the two. Those were the two AIDS hubs.
New York gays, it says here, in 79, by 1985, 64%.
When was the first cases in San Francisco? I thought it was roughly about the same time as New York.
Let me see. Well, I can't really find that just yet, but I'm just getting New York here. 79. But most likely it was probably even earlier for San Francisco, maybe.
But it just... It's you got people, you have a cabal out there that's trying to take down society so they can control it. And it's amazing how they spin it. Oh, we're encroaching on nature because of deforestation, and therefore all these viruses are starting to pop up in the world. That are, strange, that we've never been exposed to, and all that. I don't believe that line of thought, because what they're trying to really promote is this one health, agenda, where they want people to control expansion of society. They want to, for people to live in, metropolises. They don't want people to be living on farms. They don't want people to be self-sufficient. You know, we're growing a technocracy.
By the way, I didn't get an official answer here, but it just goes back to 1981. AIDS is detected in California and New York. The first cases are among gay men, and then injection drug users. So yeah, this goes back to 1981 when New York and California were the first to be hit with it.
That's detecting the AIDS. But
correct.
You know, there's that latency, so it's the infection usually takes about 9 years before.
And some claim that the first case, unrecognized at the time, may have surfaced as early as 1969, though.
Yeah.
So
when they state this 1969, are they talking about infection or actually the symptoms of the chronic phase of AIDS?
That's a good question.
So if it's 1969, then that means that goes all the way back to, then you're talking about early 60s.
Early 60s.
And that falls right back into what I was saying about that there was this move with the CIA and MH chaos, trying to control the public.
Absolutely. Agenda 21.
You know, so, you know, it's been something, and you really think about Ebola and Ebola Zaire. You know, this was in the 60s when it was starting to pop up in Africa.
This is wild.
And late 50s. I think it was late 50s and mid 60s when the outbreak started.
And Doctor, I have to ask you this. The president recently has come under fire after audio recordings were published by Bob Woodward, and I believe I brought that to your attention just recently. I do have a clip of that if you do want to hear it for those who haven't.
Yeah,
let's hear that clip.
Very tricky situation. It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. You know, people don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know.
It's pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per. You know, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. You know, so this is deadly stuff.
Yeah. So now you just heard the president talking about the virus.
Well, I want to dive into that conversation a bit, and and maybe you have the answers, maybe you don't. I don't know. When was that recorded? Because it sounds like it was recorded.
It was early.
Infection.
It was very early on in the game.
Right. That's right. So it's important that when people hear these recordings, it's about time dependency. What was the thought process, and what were the facts on the ground at that time? That's the lens you have to look at it.
Apparently, he said he was downplaying it.
Yeah, but it's important to put it in the perspective of the time of the recording. So back then, when he was saying 5%, this is when we thought the R0 value was anywhere from 4 to 5, or even 6. So this was when it was really scary. This was like probably April.
That was very early in the game, yeah.
Right.
It was scary.
Really early in the game, and we had no idea. We were just starting to get word that prophylactically hydroxychloroquine was a good therapeutic, and we didn't fully understand the pulmonary aspects versus, let's say, the blood aspects of this virus. So the non-ARDS versus the ARDS treatment, because a lot of the clinical presentation at that time was severe pulmonary, and they were not treating with corticosteroids. They weren't treating with protease inhibitors. They weren't treating it with hydroxychloroquine. And once it reached to a certain phase, they intubated, and a lot of the individuals that were intubated died. So the way they were treating it at that time was wrong.
It was very wrong.
And then we started understanding that it was a non-ARDS component to this, because it was really a blood disease. And that's when Dr. Kyle from New York, an ICU doctor, was saying he's thinking that this is non-ARDS. Stop the intubations. And, and then people start realizing, what, let's change the protocol and try to wait it out with the ventilators and start, viewing this as a non-ARDS syndrome as best as we can. But if your blood oxygen levels go way too low, you still have to intubate. So there's this fine line of, even if it's not an ARDS, you still have to intubate if the oxygen levels aren't improving. But at that time, the way we were treating it wasn't as good as we are treating it now. So you didn't know what we were dealing with back then. Plus,
absolutely.
you had the big surge that was going on in New York, and anything in New York is accentuated in the media. If someone gets a toenail infection, it's the end of the world.
That's right.
But so everything's accentuated. That's another key sociological component to this. But and at that time, and we mentioned on your show, that the data was suggesting from what was going on in Asia that there was strong suspicion that this was airborne, not just droplet. So there's when you sneeze, the virus can be in the droplets when you're sneezing or coughing. So the mask really stops those droplets from spreading. That's the power of the mask. But if you have something that is truly aerosoled, where it can go through Brownian motion in the air without droplet, then that's a totally different scenario.
Right.
So there was suspicion, strong suspicion, that a 6 or 10 foot distance was not adequate if it was aerosoled, not beyond the droplet form. So in that video, in that recording with the president, at that time, the suspicion was that it was aerosoled. But I think there's further evidence that suggests that it's not aerosoled, and
right.
that it's spread through droplet. So, but in New York, we are upgrading HVAC systems in the restaurants because, for being overly cautious, they want to try to prevent the spread of the virus through aerosol, assuming that it's aerosoled, by having better filtration systems. But I don't think that will work that well at all. I just think it's a boon for the HVAC installation companies. But but it's important to keep it in context. See, the mainstream media, when they hear a videotape or hear an audio tape or see a videotape of the president, you got to put it in the context of the recording, because the scenario was changing, the facts were changing, because our understanding of the dynamic of SARS-CoV-2 was evolving.
Yeah.
And that's so people like you and I we started covering this early on.
Early in the game.
We know the history. And you and I are starting to see that the changing history of this. It's like someone said, tell me about the Civil War, or tell me about the Revolution, or the World War II.
Right.
Well, there was, there was Normandy, and there was the Battle of the Bulge, and there was, so there was these evolutions within the war. You can't just say just one battle. You wouldn't have the full context of World War II, right? So you can't have the full context of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 disease without understanding the full timeline. So this is only a very small, early sliver of the COVID-19 timeline, and it's being spun in the media as this Trump is hiding something. Now, there's some things that Trump in the video or the audio, stated that I'm kind of like, he did state to the media that he wanted to downplay it.
Yes.
Well,
and he likes to downplay it, he
if you're,
said.
here's the problem. You're president of the United States, okay? And you got all these different balls you're juggling.
Sure.
Okay? You got to remember, in January, he was almost impeached. Or he was impeached, but almost was removed from office. All right? He came, if it wasn't for the Senate being controlled by the Republican Party, he would have been removed from office. That's what we had going on in January. All right. And February was when you started seeing the cases in the United States, at least published by Johns Hopkins. Cases probably were in the United States in December or November. But that said, so that's where the country was at. So he's balancing all this stuff. Okay, he almost was removed from office. Now all of a sudden he's got this situation where he has to shut down the economy, knowing that the greatest economy that the United States has ever seen is now going to tank. And no one knew really fully what that would mean. All right. Does that mean a Great Depression? Would there be, severe supply chain disruptions? I mean, we even talked about, well, what happens if the medical community is overrun by infection and we had to go to secondary and tertiary containment, and then all of a sudden you have FEMA camps of people sick, and who's taking care of the nuclear facilities?
Right.
We were talking about, well, you could have a meltdown through an accident because you don't have enough people working at these nuclear facilities, or whatever. Electrical shutdown, brownouts or full blackouts of the electrical grid because just the society was breaking down. We had these conversations on your show early on.
Yeah.
So no one knew what was. We kind of role played scenarios, simulated through conversation what these possible scenarios were. So you got to remember, you're the president of the United States, and you're trying to balance all these balls in the air. And so, you got to give them a little bit of credit, like saying, okay, I want to try to downplay it to try to reduce the severity of the psychological impact. Because, some of this can be exacerbated by fear. Like panic buying, everyone running to the hills and this kind of thing. So, you're trying, as a president, you're trying to steer the country in the right direction, but you also have the psychological component.
I agree with you on that, but you do understand that this is something that will be used against him during the debates.
Yeah, but who's going to use it against him? Joe Biden, who can't even tell the American public what year he was born.
Sure, it's not the American public that you have to.
So I mean, it's like,
I agree with you, but Paul, but you have to understand, it's not the American public that you have to convince. It's those in the higher upper echelon that control things that you have to convince, and those are the ones who are really running the game.
Well, the people that are really running the game want Trump out.
That's what I mean. They don't want him there. So.
I mean, they're trying to kill him.
Well, I'm glad you said. Well, I'm glad you said that, because just recently a package was intercepted by screeners this week before it reached the White House. Apparently, someone mailed in. I think it was from Canada. They mailed the president ricin.
Right.
And trying to take him out.
Right.
You're not wrong.
The thing is the last month or month and a half, he's either been shot at, on the grounds of the White House. A drone, tries to crash into, was it Marine One or Air Force One? I wasn't sure.
Something like that, yeah, I heard.
Yeah, all right, and then what was the other thing that happened?
Someone shot at the White House, I believe. Too.
Yeah, someone shot at the White House. And then the ricin thing.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is being hunted down by the deep state, or even above the deep state, the ones that are controlling the deep state. They don't want him in office. They're trying to get rid of him at all costs. I find it really odd. All right, because you got to remember, these powers that are controlling the situation and the deep staters, they're on side of the CCP, and the CCP released the virus.
But the virus was released right after they finalized Brexit. Brexit is the crack in globalism. And so this whole structure, the globalistic structure, is starting to crack. The facade is cracking. Trump is a very nationalistic. He's about restructuring all these deals that have been around, for decades. And, these people that were making a lot of money and had a lot of power because of these deals are starting to see that power and those deals erode. They wanted a Chinese century. Okay? This is an important point here. They wanted a Chinese century. In the news and everyone was saying the Chinese century. The 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. But when you start seeing during the Trump administration, one, they had the huge hog virus issue that they had to kill all the hogs in China. They had agricultural problems because of flooding, and so crop yields were down. Then they had the trade problems that they were having with the United States. So they had economic problem. They had individual companies pulling out of China and either repatriating back to the United States or going to like Vietnam or other Asian countries for low cost. China is becoming more high cost, not low cost. And that all are negative for the Chinese economy, going against the Chinese century. So they see this deflating economy happening. So the United States pre-COVID-19 was climbing. So it's all about relativism, all right? China was going down, America was going up. So how is China going to be the 21st, the powers that be that want China being the 21st century and the totalitarianism all around the world, because they want the model that China has to run the world, instead of China having to dig, to fill the hole, the economic hole that we're in. What was easier was to weaken the United States, release the virus, weaken the economy of the United States, so it's now back at par to where China is at. So they are now in the game for another Chinese 21st century, because they've weakened the United States with more debt. Now, the United States have pumped in a lot of debt to pump up the economy, and our economic situation is dire.
It's a mess.
We don't know how long this is really going to. But it may take 10 years to fix this problem.
Yeah.
So now China is in the running for the 21st century again. It's set in stone, Michael. It was set in stone that if it wasn't for the fall of the economy in the United States, China was never going to have the 21st century economically, because of what was happening with this the trade agreement and the agricultural problems that they were having, and that the businesses that were moving out of China and moving into other countries or back to the United States.
What's wild,
China
Paul?
saw this, and they wanted to bring America down to get it at par.
You know what's wild, Paul? When we first started talking 6 months ago, I asked you, do you think China did this on purpose? You didn't want to think about it at the time, but now,
right.
I think you see
you gotta remember, at that, it was hard enough to just absorb the bioweapon.
I felt like they did. I felt like they did. They did us dirty on this one. I knew that right away.
I wanted to be again at.
You were trying to be optimistic, Paul.
Well,
there's nothing wrong with that.
I lost that optimism a long time ago.
Well, shit, it happens, my friend.
But yeah, like I was stating on your first show, you got to try to use the scientific method, but you also have to use your gut too.
Yeah.
Because information's imperfect. But at that time, you set up a hypothesis, you try to collect data, and then you refine the hypothesis and you work out a theory. So at that time on the first show, I stated it leaked out of P4, but we don't know why.
Right.
And
right.
at that time, I said, I don't have any evidence to suggest that it was leaked on purpose. But if it was leaked on purpose, it was either the Chinese leaking it, and I didn't fully understand why. But I said something on the order of maybe it was to try to control Hong Kong and Taiwan, or it was the CIA that infiltrated the P4 lab and they leaked it out to bring down President Xi.
Well, there's
all
sorts of scenarios.
But I said I didn't have any evidence of that, so therefore I had to lean on the side that it was most likely an accident to leak, like a lab accident that happened, and that's what Epoch Times in their documentary published, that there was an accident with the primates with one of the lab workers, and one of the lab workers ended up getting sick, and they didn't want to tell the authorities that they had this accident, and that's how it spread. But I think there's more evidence that suggests that it was leaked out before December. And that we did probably was near the October event 201 timeframe, which is mid-October.
Right, and of course you've been mentioning that a lot here. Event 201, and I just wanted to mention that there's another thing called Crimson Contagion, which is even more ridiculous. Another simulation, for those that don't know, that was conducted months prior to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic that involved a scenario in which tourists returning from China spread the respiratory virus in the United States, beginning in Chicago. And this was called Crimson Contagion, for those that don't know, which is pretty nuts to begin with. All these things, all these it reminds me of 9/11 yet again. I mean, we had prior knowledge before other governments had intel, and they let us know about it, yet we sort of just let it go by.
Right, exactly. That's why I'm saying
we're very passive.
The deep state is not for the Constitution or the country. It's for this global integration, this one world government. And there are much more powerful people that are pulling the strings of the ones that are working at the deep state level. Now, the ones that are working at the deep state level think that they are going to be put into powerful positions or survive the tyranny of this integration. The reality is they're expendable. The powers that be are going to get rid of these individuals once they are no longer needed.
Right.
And they don't realize that. So this is why that we the people, on our Constitution, we the people, and the inalienable rights and of the Constitution, protecting that is so important. And in nationhood and in community and localization, not globalization, this is where we need to go. And the public at large needs to start becoming more vocal on the streets about this, instead of the BLM movements and whatnot. Like Ginsburg, going back to Ginsburg, they did the vigil in front of the Supreme Court. All right, this person's dead now, so then them doing the vigil, it doesn't mean anything. All right, she's dead. No matter how many people light candles, she ain't coming back. All right.
That's
but
right.
What they could do is rub their eyes, wake up, and see that there's a new world order, running a playbook. And one of the big plays is COVID-19.
The new woke order, I like to call it.
Yeah. And they, we need as a country to say, hell no. We're not going to allow this to happen. That's why I keep on talking about the Biopatriot Act and the erosion of our civil liberties and the decashing and the forced vaccine program and the over surveillance and the overreach of the government and all these things that are that are eroding our constitutional freedoms.
Absolutely.
And I want the lawyers to start stepping up to the plate and saying, you know what? They said an oath. These lawyers said an oath to uphold the Constitution. All right. And they're afraid to do it because they might get disbarred. All right. The same thing is happening in medical school. You have to say the Hippocratic Oath. And it's about patient autonomy. It's about the patient-physician relationship. And you're not to do harm. Well, when doctors are seeing that people that are in power, like Fauci, are telling physicians not to use hydroxychloroquine, saying that he doesn't think it's good for you, and doctors have evidence to state otherwise, it is the physicians out there's responsibility to inform the public to have a counter argument against Fauci. So the ones that did do that, like Dr. Gold, she lost her job. She was a physician that stood up to try to inform the public that what the CDC and the HHS was doing was wrong about hydroxychloroquine, especially prophylactically. She loses her job. Other physicians are afraid to stand up to the plate because they'll lose their license. But yet they swore an oath in medical school. Under no circumstance should they do harm. But the far majority of the physicians out there are not willing to step up to the plate and follow that oath. And the same thing is happening with the lawyers.
Money sways everyone.
Yeah, it's sad. It's really sad.
You're right.
And the medical schools are afraid to say anything.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because they won't get the funding.
Lose funding.
They won't, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's just like they're captured.
It's a terrible situation, Paul.
These institutions are captured. It's people like yourself and I and others. They need to really raise the alarm and get the public energized to say, no, we're not going to have this happen. If people stood up, if we were to learn something about Obamacare, when they were rolling out Obamacare, if no one signed up for it, it would have failed. Because politically, people would have said, you know what? You made a law. We don't believe in it. We're not going to follow it. If everyone did that, they would shit their pants.
Yeah.
The politicians would shit their pants and then take it off the books. But people complied, and because they complied because of fear, the government was able to grow stronger.
That's
and control
right.
your life.
That's
and
right.
We need to start saying no. If everyone learned from that situation and apply it to this situation, and if people say, you know what, I'm going to go back to work, I'm not going to be tested for COVID-19, and I'm not going to wear the goddamn mask anymore, then it's over. The situation would be over. It would be a different case if we were having this conversation in April, where we didn't know much about the virus, and we had these huge infections, and we had a large uptick of hospitalizations and ICU patients, but we don't have that now. So it's time to start living our lives again instead of being fearful. But we have too many people complying and being afraid, and that's why I did the video about COVID-19 laziness. People are using the COVID-19 as an excuse to not live their life.
I saw that video, by the way. Good video.
No,
I recommend that one.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so Paul, I hate to do this, but we definitely are coming to a close, but I did have one more final question for you, and it's more philosophical than anything else, but I did have this for you, and I thought you would probably entertain this one. Are humans better at creation or destruction? A classic question for you, Paul.
Well, we have the potential for both, all right? Obviously. But I think, unfortunately, we don't make the right choices, And because we don't make the right choices, the negative effects is destruction. See, like the conversation we just had previously was we can make the choice and not comply and create a better society. Instead, we are complying and we are slowly destroying our economy.
Right.
So unfortunately, we as a collective, the human race as a collective is very destructive.
We are both light and darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid so. And that's life. Let that soak in for the mind for those out there. And Paul, I do want to thank you again for being a part of the program. Always a tremendous time with you. Always a learning experience with you here, Paul.
Well, I appreciate, coming on and, and having, these talks and, what's interesting.
It's good talk with you here, Paul.
Yeah. What's interesting is that you've been in the trenches at the early beginning of this crisis, and you sense the history of it. It wasn't just covering a small a small news event. You've been traveling the whole timeline with me on this.
That's right.
So you're one of the historians of COVID-19. You're gonna mark my words on this. Years later, as we start to learn more and more about this and the long-term effects of this, you're gonna have you're gonna be one of the quote experts of what happened in the United States. Because you followed the timeline.
Yeah, these
from
are
the
historic
very beginning
times,
to talking to the people that were trying to figure it out and trying to save the country and da 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 da.
You're
but I
right.
appreciate you being in the trenches with me.
Yeah, we've been here together, and we have not swayed our opinions on the issue. And as time has gone by, we've only been proven to be correct on our stance. It's been quite remarkable. And again, not in a braggadocious sort of demeanor. It's just the reality. It just happened.
But the thing is that the first act of this gigantic global play is just that first act is COVID-19.
That's right. This is only the beginning, by the way.
Right. There's this there is this geopolitical play that's going on with the CCP in the United States that could lead to Third World War, and there's this civil liberty erosion in that Biopatriot Act and the extension of everything that we saw right after 9/11 happening in this country. And so this is an evolving story. This is not just about a virus and about a vaccine to take or not to take. It's a much, much bigger issue.
I'm afraid you're right. So once again, Paul, always an honor and pleasure to have you here on the program. We will do this again in the very near future. Paul, go ahead and plug anything you like. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the listeners, thank you for, listening tonight. I appreciate it. I want you to take what we were saying and take it to heart and to talk to people and to inform people, because by informing people on the things that Michael and I have been saying from day one could save a life, and two could save the Constitution of our country. And that is the most important and most dear thing in my mind that we can do. And so instead of plugging my websites or something like that, I'd rather you spend the time and protect our Constitution.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Paul. See you on the other side, my friend.
All right. Later.
Mahalo. And there he goes, boys and girls. That was the one and only Dr. Paul Cottrell. And yes, he didn't want to plug himself, but I will for you. If you go to YouTube and just type in his name, you will find all his content out there. And yes, Dr. Paul Cottrell, you can trust the man. He's not selling you any bullshit, that's for sure. And of course, as we take it home here tonight, and I pull this Larry Silverstein style, I do want to thank all of you out there who have signed up for the Patreon. That's patreon.com/Michael Decon. And if you go there, you will find a free episode just for you. And if you like it, please sign up. $4, $5, whatever you like. Just sign up. It's relatively cheap. If you can afford it, that is. If you don't, or if you can, rather. All good with me. That's patreon.com/Michael Decon. A few episodes are free there for you. Please go there whenever you'd like. Once again, I do want to thank all of you out there for hanging out with us this evening. Those in the chat room, thank you kindly. International listeners out there, love you very much. Thank you for all your support. It's been an interesting night yet again, and I truly hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. The mind continues to race as it always does. And if you're like me, your mind always races. Even when you're trying to sleep and you are staring at that ceiling fan of yours, contemplating the universe, don't worry. You're not alone. We are all with you. Stay safer no matter where you are on this island Earth. I'm Michael Decon. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.